Welcome to the State of Our Faith, and we are grateful for those of you who have been patient with us as we've worked through some technical difficulties. The State of Our Faith is an occasional program by Faith Commons that addresses matters of faith and public interest. And today, as always, I'm joined by Nancy Kasten. Rabbi Kasten is here with me. I'm George Mason, and we are delighted to welcome the Reverend Frederick Douglass Haynes III, the pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. So we know today, of course, just hours ago, that a jury found police officer Derek Chauvin guilty of the murder of George Floyd. The 3 counts against him were all guilty: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. We turn first to you, Freddie. What would you like to say in response to today's news?
Well, first, let me say thank you to both of you for the honor of engaging in conversation with you. Both of you are heroes of mine. Rabbi Nancy, of course, is a shero of mine, and I appreciate your consciousness, your commitment. Your faith inspires my faith. And so thank you so much for the work that you do. I'll simply say that on one level, my heart still goes out to the family of George Floyd, because they have had to relive the worst day of their lives for almost a year now. And then it was intensified, of course, during the trial. And so I pray for them, and my heart goes out to them, knowing that today accountability was served. I won't go as far as to say justice was served, because if justice was served, George Floyd would be alive. If justice is to be served, then there will be transformational change in policing in this country. And so on one level, my heart goes out to them. On another level, I am sadly relieved, and it's really sad that from the moment I learned that there would be a verdict today, internally, I was on edge. And I was on edge because of the ugly history in this nation. And it just really broke my heart that this is where we are in this country, that we have such low expectations when it comes to hoping that justice actually is served. Even though we saw the murder on video. Over 9 minutes, we've discovered. We watched the life of this man taken from him, and yet there was a sense of this could go really wrong if the system continues to operate as it has operated in the past.
Nancy?
Yeah, I mean, it almost makes you wonder, is this what it takes to have 8 minutes of video and all these eyewitnesses corroborating all the evidence in order for this to happen? A few weeks ago, Reverend Mason and I were at the dedication of Botham Jean Boulevard, and standing in that place and looking at the building where a young man, my son's age, was shot and killed in his own apartment. And, and that verdict was not sufficient in my mind. And the fact that people could call into question what happened in that place because there weren't so many eyewitnesses, and even though all the evidence pointed to a certain verdict, just makes us uncertain that justice is going to be served in this country. And for people of faith, I think, we as clergy try to inspire a sense of faith and trust and hope in people. And we really need good government and trustworthy civil servants to be able to do that with confidence. It makes our work so much harder when this is the way that things play out and we have to worry about it. I mean, I do hope that this is a turning point for our nation. I don't know. We'll have to see. You know, we have a lot of other cases that need to be determined before we can see if this is really an opportunity for hope.
I do think we have had a collective sigh of relief as a country today. And I say that because I think what I've witnessed is that this particularly egregious example of police brutality was something that was hard to deny in the white community and of those who support law enforcement generally. And it's important that we have moments as a country where the matter is about the human race, not just about what race you are, whether black or white. And this was one of those occasions where we looked at collectively at the humanity of what was going on and said, this is simply wrong. And so I think there's a moment of pause that we can have now and say, all right, this is the kind of country we do want to live in that makes this about what's right and wrong, not about what's right and left, about what's, whether it's law enforcement against communities of color and that sort of thing, unintentional bias and these sorts of things. This was a day that we can collectively sigh and say, all right, let's use this as a linchpin.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think we have an opportunity to move in the right direction if we do. We're almost at a crossroads. There was James Baldwin was involved in conversation with Nikki Giovanni, I believe it was 1963, during the Birmingham campaign. And they were watching that insufferable scene where that police officer had his knee on the neck of this elderly Black woman who was peacefully protesting. And her response was, as bad as it was to see the officer with his knee on her neck, she was more upset about a country that could produce an officer who felt he could get away with that and not see the humanity of that elderly Black woman. And so for me, I took that statement, that insightful statement by Giovanni, and said, what kind of country could produce a Derek Chauvin? But at the same time, I believe we're at a crossroads because this country also produced a jury. This country produced many police officers who broke through the blue wall of silence.
They did indeed.
They denounced what happened.
Yep.
And that lets me know that there is hope, you know, as a person of faith, that we can really move forward. Now, my prayer is that we connect the dots and not just see this as an isolated, ugly episode where someone did something that was so egregious we had no choice, but instead that we have those same officers who have the courage to break through that blue wall and say, let's take a good, honest look at this system now, because a system produced this man. One of the things that was said online today by a good colleague of mine from Atlanta, he said that, what if this had not been caught on video? My response to him was, how many times has this not been caught on video? Right. And so we have to reach a point now where it's not so much what gets caught on video, but as you said, George, what's right and what's wrong, what's humane and what's inhumane, what is just and what is unjust. And that's when this country will really start to live out the true meaning of its creed.
Well, and unfortunately, the video, I mean, it's not just video, it's video and it's 8 minutes and it's a lot of different videos. I mean, we've gotten a lot of other egregious incidents captured on video, and these juries have not chosen to uphold justice. And, you know, people can create their own realities. So we really, again, I do think it's about humanity, and we have to uphold that sense of humanity. At the same time, our implicit biases are strong and they run deep in this country. And we really need to encourage everyone to open up their minds and hearts and recognize their own predilections when it comes to the narratives that they think are true and the narratives that they're suspicious
I
of.
want to ask each of you then, the danger that we have, and I think Freddie, you alluded to this, is that we see this particular incident and we view it where there is a kind of relief that we have that the bad apple has been taken out of the barrel, so to speak. You know, this is the concept of law enforcement generally is good, and we have a few bad apples that spoil it for everyone. Now we've isolated that. We put, and this is in the language of ancient Israel, this is the scapegoat, right? We've put all of the sins of the people on the one person, we've released him into the wild, and now we can all have a collective relief and go back to the way it was. Well, I think we all know that's not what we want to do in this moment. So without then painting all law enforcement with, a blanket condemnation because of this, let's talk about the system and where we go from here and say, what are the specific kinds of reforms that need to take place that we should, as people of faith, be advocating for in Dallas, Texas, in the state of Texas, and nationally, that would prevent these sorts of things from happening in the future? So let's just go around the horn a bit and say, here are things that are happening, that can happen, and that should happen in order for us to change this narrative.
Well, I'll just say quickly that we have to be honest about how policing, especially of Black bodies, began. And that is, it has its ugly roots in the slave patrols. And so that DNA continues to manifest itself. And that is why I always reject wholeheartedly the notion of we have bad apples. We've had so many bad apples now that we've got to check the orchard. And if I had this many bad apples, literally, that I'm eating, then, okay, this tree needs to be uprooted because there's something wrong with this tree. And so for me, I don't know if reform is strong enough now. I've reached a point where we really need to take a good look at doing what the activists are calling for us to do, and that is to reimagine what public safety looks like. Public safety should look like sending experts to the scene of a mental health crisis, as opposed to those who are equipped with a gun and a taser and no expertise or education whatsoever when it comes to dealing with the mental health crisis. I think it's time for us to really regroup. I mean, several years ago, one of their own, former police chief here in Dallas, Chief Brown, said in response to a crisis at that time, we asked police to do too much. I'm saying, let's stop asking them to do what we've been asking them to do, which has not contributed to public safety. I think it's, several of the activists, Brittany Cooper speaks of the fact that in too many instances, they don't solve crime, they contribute to the crime because they show up after the crime has already been committed. We need to look at those systems that can preclude crimes from being committed. So public safety has to do with job creation. Public safety has to do with healthy communities. Public safety is more than just having someone with a gun and a taser and a badge with the authority of the state showing up at the scene of the crime after the crime has already been committed. We ought to have, as far as I'm concerned, too much sense to keep doing what we're doing and hoping that something better will come out of it.
Good. Nancy?
I think we've seen study after study, consultant after consultant come into our community and tell our city leaders exactly that more police will not create more public safety in our city, that we need to divert some of the funding that we've been giving to the police department to other sources of public safety, like, as you say, mental health services, affordable housing and safe housing, and other community development projects and job creation for people, so that the poverty and the hopelessness and the illness, the public illness that people are experiencing, don't create situations in which crime is necessary, even in some cases. And we also have to think about the kinds of crimes that are being committed that aren't being prosecuted by our city government, not enforcing coding, zoning and codes for toxic waste and other.
These things just decimate the communities that are most affected, and they are communities of color. They are enclaves of poverty. They are incubators of hopelessness, and they are over-policed.
Right.
Now, all of that is a terribly toxic combination, a cocktail that is only going to be volatile in our society. But now here's a question that comes from Facebook, and that is that so Chauvin is so many people we know. When push comes to shove, racial bias takes over. What do you want white people to do from here? What should white people do as a result of a verdict like this? What should be our reflection upon that?
Well, for me, I think it's very important that white people study racism. Mm-hmm. And I think that takes a certain amount of humility to actually study racism. This past weekend, I understand that Bill Maher, for example, makes a statement during an interview that, okay, so this book, White Fragility, simply means that either I'm racist or I don't know I'm racist. And so there was an arrogance about that, where he didn't really take the time to learn that as a human being, he has blind spots. All of us have blind spots. I'll say it, I'm a Black male with privilege that comes from being male in this country. That means I have blind spots as it relates to sexism and toxic masculinity. And I have to have the humility to learn, to listen to sisters who are violated by toxic masculinity and sexism. And I'm simply saying that every white person should have that same humility and say, you know what, I have blind spots. There are things I don't know. I need to take the time to listen, to learn, to understand what racism is, and not arrogantly define racism and the experience of Black people who have found themselves victimized by it for over 400 years in these disunited states. Now, that takes humility. It takes a certain amount of, okay, I'm willing to learn. But when we do that, we now begin to move toward creating what Dr. King was talking about when he talked about the beloved community. But it takes humility, and it takes recognizing our own ignorance and our blind spots.
Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, I know a lot of white people who have read the books and studied racism and really are asking themselves what they can do to undo the damage and to create a more equitable society. But some of those same people, when they hear, about the crime rate in Dallas and get told that the way to lower that crime rate is to enforce the police department even more, so that there's more surveillance, they don't put the pieces together. They don't connect the facts and the research about, for example, public safety and what creates public safety with what they're learning about racism. They don't connect those dots. I think we need to do a better job of connecting those dots. These city council elections are being run on, a crime platform in many of the districts the crime rate in Dallas is only bad in certain areas, and those aren't necessarily the areas where the city council is competition is most heated. So I think people just need to really connect the dots to think about their own personal experiences. What are really the threats that they're facing in their lives, and what are they most concerned about? I think if they're most concerned about inequity and racial justice, then they will realize that they're not sacrificing their own personal safety when they demand more accountability and a different way of looking at our community.
I think that so what you're talking about is a movement from, especially for white people, an understanding of racism that is about personal animus or personal bias, personal feelings about people of other races, to understanding that racism really is about the combination of that with power. That is, the structures that enforce it and reinforce it, which means that we have to move from this sense of being defensive about our own attitudes and biases to being, to connecting it to policy, to the way policing happens, to the way we elect, as Nancy says, to the people we elect to lead us. Now, I'm going to be provocative here a bit and be very specific. I was on a call with the mayor and a lot of faith leaders just a little while ago, and the mayor was very affirming and relieved by the verdict. And that he said over and over again. And I appreciate that. And I was actually listening for my colleagues who are people of color. I felt like it was their responsibility to speak. I didn't say anything at the time. But at the same time, what I want to say to the mayor, and I will try to say to him privately, is I appreciate that position very much. Whether he's black or white, it doesn't matter in this particular instance. It's that we have to move to then what are the policies that we're putting into place? Because he is supporting city council members against city council candidates against current members who voted to shift money from the police overtime budget in order to create more humane policing by putting those mental health workers, those social workers, by relieving people from desk work and putting them on the street so that we can put civilians in those places. All of these were simply attempts to shift some of the nature of the policing and the policy level stuff. But now he is on the side of saying that we need more money to police. We need more people to give what seems like a carte blanche to the police department when 60% of the city budget is already allocated to public safety. And we need a complete transformation in our community. So what I want to say is, whether you're the mayor or you're a person voting in city council, don't let this binary of public safety versus people of color or racial bias versus a secure city, this Black Lives Matter or Back the Blue. These are binaries that are not helpful to us. You can do both of those things and be a leader by offering creative solutions that are in the interest of humanity in our communities.
Right. I think that it's one thing to be political, and let's be honest, it's really easy now to say, oh, I'm so glad that Derek Chauvin was convicted. That's really easy. After all, your chief of police, Garcia, came out, and made the statement early on that, what Chauvin did was criminal. And so that it's really easy to do that. But again, to use the language of Rabbi Nancy, let's connect dots now. And the dots have to be connected, as you're saying, George, with public policy, and public policy that, again, envisions, imagines public safety and recognizes the root causes of some of the things that you are politically using for brownie points, as it were, such as crime and violence here, the uptick in crime and violence there, without ever taking note of the fact that most of the time when there is an uptick in crime, when you see crime and violence in these areas, look at the relationship between crime and a lack of access to opportunity. Look at the relationship between crime and violence and environmental injustice and environmental racism. Look at the relationship between a lack of access to good quality education, a lack of access to recreational resources. I mean, the sad reality is we live in a city in 2021 where, in terms of recreation opportunities, what we have on the south side of town is limited to a water park that is quite small, quite inadequate, and only able to be used during the summer, as it were. But the rest of the year, where do persons on my side of town go for recreation? They go to what? A car wash. They go to places that would not ever suffice for recreational opportunities on the other side of town. And yet that is not the kind of thinking where we're connecting the dots, Mr. Mayor, between what took place in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and what takes place every single day right here in Dallas. There has to be that kind of courageous thinking that connects the dots between systemic racism that produces certain outcomes. And in this city, and I'll say this real quickly, in this city, as in every city in the country, it's rooted in an ugly history where public policy created the pockets of poverty, the pockets of economic neglect that exist right here in Dallas. And so if public policy created those pockets of poverty and economic neglect, we're going to need public policy to overturn those same pockets of poverty and create communities of opportunity.
You know, it strikes me, I know that in my congregation, we are engaged in a program called Facing Our Truths, where small groups are reading and trying to understand racism more clearly. And our faith leaders and even lay leaders are very engaged in this work and are very, they're very outspoken about racism in the congregation. But there is a lot of pushback, from some people who think that, we should leave religion and spirituality and God in one place, and public policy should be separated from that. They shouldn't be connected at all. And, I'd like for each of you, because you are congregational ministers, I sit in the pews most of the time, to talk about how you translate that in your congregations, that connection between faith and public policy, and why it is so important for people of faith to be engaged in the public square and in putting their faith values into practice in the public square.
Well, I'll just say for me that I come from a faith tradition, a Black church tradition that has always united in holy wedlock personal piety with public policy. You don't have a Harriet Tubman doing what she's doing as a woman of faith without someone who recognized that there is a God who created everything and everyone. And if the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein, then surely God has something to say about public policy, about systems and structures. And so we refuse to divorce the spiritual from the secular or the social, and the sacred from the secular. It's rooted in our hermeneutic, our understanding of the 8th century prophets in the Hebrew Bible, who were, from their spiritual orientation, speaking of socio-political economic realities, to our Jesus, who basically said in his inaugural message, again, going back to the Hebrew scriptures in Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me for social transformation, preaching good news to the poor, setting the captives free, opening the eyes of the blind, proclaiming the year of economic justice. And so there is a wedding, as it were, of the social and the spiritual that is undeniable in my faith tradition that I have chosen to embrace. And so as far as I'm concerned, whenever I hear someone saying, don't get involved in politics, then I recognize, and again, I hear it even from Black persons of faith, but I also recognize that they have been informed by a white evangelical hermeneutic that is rooted in racism in many instances, because as long as you don't bring God and Jesus into the public square, that means I can keep my systems in place that value some over others.
Well, there you go. So if you're asking me, here's the way that works. And I'm just picking up on Reverend Haynes here, because the honest truth is that while the Black church has been wedded personal piety and public policy, the white church generally in America has been divorced from those two things for a very long time. That divorce can largely be attributed to the need to create a different way of understanding the Christian faith in order to sustain slaveholder policies. And so religion became about, for white people, a matter of the heart, being right before God, not about how we treat our neighbor and how we value every human being, because we already knew that we didn't treat some human beings as human beings. I think it was James Baldwin who said that the problem for religious people is that they have to keep looking at Black people and realize and trying to make the case that they are not actually human, and that's hard to do when you keep having to look at them. But that's what we were doing in a sense for a very long time, and so that's been part of our DNA. We're trying to get remarried. All right, we're trying to marry again. The personal piety and the public policy now. And this is why I say that I think the Black church has largely saved Christianity for America, in large part waiting for white people to come to grips with it, to repent and to see what it means to be a follower of Jesus, in effect, right now. What we need in the white church, frankly, is not just pastors who are willing to preach about this or teach about it. We also need lay people who are willing to encourage us, who are willing to stand with us and for us, and to say, that's actually the truth, even if it's hard for me to hear, because otherwise it's lonely out there and it's challenging. But we need lay people who are willing to say, this is hard, but it's necessary. This is what spirituality really is. Well, this is a big start on a response here, and I think I want to say that if you want to continue to understand these matters, Faith Commons is an organization that is seeking to continue to educate. You can go to our website at faithcommons.org. There is a section on racial justice. There are numerous articles and videos. There are podcasts on good God. There's all sorts of material there. There's bibliography. You can learn if you want to learn, but this is necessary for us to do. And then get involved in your local elections, your city council elections, your state politics, because we have now at the state level, we have the George Floyd Act that is being presented. We have the Botham Jean law that is bill that has been presented. All of these are in response to what we've been talking about today. And they are about reforming police behaviors and about changing the criminal justice system in a way that is more humane. And we can do this work, but we can't sit on the sidelines. We've got to communicate with our legislators and with our city council persons and the mayor so that we have the kind of city and state as well as nation that we want. Freddie Haynes, thank you for being with us. We're grateful that you never tire in this work for justice, that you are a uniter, not a divider, that you are a person who looks for allies, not enemies. And we are grateful that you are our friend and our brother. And Rabbi Kasten, as Freddie said earlier, you inspire us every day with your faith and your commitment. So thanks for tuning in and for participating to the State of Our Faith. And we'll see you down the road.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.